This is Revelation chapter 12, verse 12, and it reads, Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth he had about a short time. First of all, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rachakadash. I want to give double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone who teach and rule well where I got this truth from. And also all the Akim who push this truth in sincerity. I want to say Shalom. Yeah, check this out.
Distancing show. It's great to be on. Let's jump straight into the first question that everybody would want me to ask. You delivered a TED Talk where you predicted pretty much what is happening now. Now, thanks to the world we live in, that has sprouted a bunch of conspiracy theories, everything from Bill Gates invented this virus to prove himself right, or he knew it was going to happen and that's why he said it. Was that TED Talk about this virus, or was that a hypothetical that has now come true?
Well, I didn't know specifically that it'd be coronavirus and that it would hit in late 2019. But the goal of the talk was to encourage governments to make the investments so we could respond very quickly and keep the case numbers very, very low. And so sadly, this is not a case where, I feel like, hey, I told you so. Because we didn't use that time when it was clear as the biggest threat to kill millions of people to have the diagnostic standing by, to be ready to ramp up a vaccine factory. A few things were done. Some countries, our foundation funded some work that will help with the vaccines now, will help with the diagnostics, but most of what was called for, particularly in a New England Journal of Medicine article I did that went into way more specifics than I could in a short TED Talk. Those things didn't get done, and so that's why it's taking us a long time to get our act together faced with this threat.
Here's a question I have as an individual. How is it that you, as a non-government, knew this information and knew that it needed to be acted on, and governments and organizations that are specifically tasked with protecting people from this very thing either didn't have the information or ignored it. What do you think happened there? Because I know you interact with governments, you talk to organizations like the CDC, like the WHO. What went wrong?
Well, there are lots of individuals who were as worried as I was. You know, people like Dr. Fauci, who've been through various epidemics. And so when we had Ebola, Zika, SARS, MERS, we were lucky that they didn't transmit very easily. They weren't these respiratory viruses where somebody who's not very symptomatic and is still walking around can spread the disease in some cases to literally dozens of people. So the respiratory transmission, particularly because world travel is so intense, that's where I show the simulation in that speech and say, this keeps me up at night more than even war, which is no small thing. And yet, in terms of being systematic about, okay, let's run a simulation and see how would we reach out to the private sector for tests or ventilators, and what kind of quarantine would we do? And as we enter into this, we haven't practiced at all. And so you can see it's, you know, every state is being forced to figure things out on their own, and it's very ad hoc. It's not like when a war comes and we've done, 20 simulations of various types of threats, and we've made sure that the training, communications, logistics, all those pieces fall into place very rapidly.
You are in an interesting position where in many ways you are an expert on this topic because of the work that you now do in philanthropy. Your goal has been to eradicate malaria across the globe, focusing in Africa. You work with infectious disease, you work with experts in and around infectious disease. When you look at the coronavirus as it stands now, it's happened, leaders acted late, but what do you think needs to be done going forward? You wrote an interesting op-ed about this, but what do you think we need to do from the ground up, from the people to the leaders to the private sector?
Well, the main tools we have right now are the behavioral change, the social distancing, which often means staying at home most of the time, and the testing capacity to identify who in particular needs to get isolated, and then testing their contacts to make sure that we can catch it so early that a lot of people who get sick don't infect anyone else. Now, so our foundation is engaged in projecting what's going to go on, the modeling. Our partner IHME is, telling each state what they should think about in terms of ventilators and capacity. Further on out, the work we're doing now to find a therapeutic, a drug to reduce the disease, to cut the deaths down, we're hopeful that even in 6 months, some of those will have been approved. But the ultimate solution, the only thing that really lets us go back completely to normal and feel good about sitting in a stadium with lots of other people, is to create a vaccine and not just take care of our country, but take that vaccine out to the global population.
Just a quick question about farming. You both have talked about how digital technologies, from mobile phones to sequencing genomes of seeds, could play a very big role in farming in Africa. How big of a role do you see small farmers playing in this effort? Are you focusing on bigger farmers? Just how is this going to play out?
We are quite focused on smallholder farmers because the predominant number of Africans farming today are smallholder farmers, and they're on pieces of land that are less than 2 hectares, so it's quite a small farm. There are agro dealers that exist in these countries. We need to get that network up and running, just like we've got the vaccine network up and running and getting vaccines out, getting up and running so they're teaching people proper planting, proper fertilize, proper irrigation, and getting them new seeds as they come out. There's fantastic technology going on for pest-resistant seeds, for drought-resistant seeds, flood-resistant seeds as the rains come at different times. And so as people are educated about them and they start to see their neighbors getting, a third more yield off their farm, they say, I want those. So getting those systems up and running. Again, one of the most promising places we see that happening is Ethiopia today. They really have gotten their infrastructure and agriculture working, and that will lift up not just farmers on their own farm so they have more to eat, but they can put it on the local market and it lifts up the economy.
There's been talk of gene editing and really getting high tech with seeds. Of course, there's some controversy over that. How big of a role do you think technology and gene editing may be used to really tackle the food problem?
Yeah, what are called GMOs are done by changing the genes of the plant, and it's done in a way where there's a very thorough safety procedure, and it's pretty incredible because it reduces the amount of pesticide you need, raises productivity, can help with malnutrition by getting vitamin fortification, and so I think for Africa this is going to make a huge difference, particularly as they face climate change, the increased productivity and resilience of the seeds, most of which will come from the new scientific techniques. So the gene editing just allows that to be done in a more precise way than it's ever been done in the past. So it'll accelerate the rate of innovation.
Do you think there's a certain naivete that without that it could be done anyway? That you've seen the results on the ground of conventional.
The Africans, it's up in the air, and Kenya just approved BT maize. The Europeans have decided they don't want to use it, most of them, which is fine. They're not facing malnutrition and starvation. If they want to pay a premium for food of a kind, it's not a huge deal. The U.S., China, Brazil are using these things, and if you want farmers in Africa to improve nutrition and be competitive on the world market, as long as the right safety things are done, that's really beneficial. It's kind of a second round of the green revolution. And so the Africans, I think, will choose to let their people have enough to eat. We need to meet a new constraint, and that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet, and the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses. Now, the exact amount of how you map from a certain increase in of CO2 to what temperature will be and where the positive feedbacks are, there's some uncertainty there, but not very much. And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists in this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. The second factor is...
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.